I had my first out-of-body experience when I was 4 years old. I remember having a vivid dream that took place inside my bedroom, and then suddenly, halfway waking up and seeing my own body from above as I floated in the air of the dark room. Of course, having no idea what was happening, I screamed, and I kept screaming until I could finally hear my own cries that forced me awake. And this began to happen again and again more frequently. And my parents had gone from comforting me every night to becoming worried and sometimes annoyed. I took medication that ridded me of what they saw as night terrors, and was then weaned off the pills by the time I was 6. But my OBEs started up again. I was older then, not as frightened. But before long, I was teaching myself how to control it. I could float around my bedroom. It was fun. It beat the hell out of any regular old dreams, and sometimes even the lucid ones, which I'm also no stranger to. I soon began to expand my territory. I couldn't touch or interact with anything while outside of my body, so my options for nightly entertainment in my room were limited. Floating through the toy chests and seeing the insides of my stuffed animals was only fun for so long. So I trained my strange superpower and increased its range. After a month or so of trying, I was able to explore the rest of our house. I could watch late-night television with my parents without them ever knowing, although I had no say in what channel was on. The nights they watched HBO or one of their R-rated movies were the best. The sound was always limited in a projected state. Voices were muffled, like people were speaking underwater. But luckily for me, my mom was hard of hearing, so she always watched TV with the captions on, which benefited my viewing experience during my nightly escapades. It also had me reading at a high school grade level by age 8. I think I kind of assumed at first that everybody had my ability, that it was just part of what meant to be human. But after I brought up how I flew around the house at breakfast a couple of times, and they just told me that it sounded like a fun dream, I realized that I could really do something special. Sometimes I would even use it to spy on my dad when he wrote his stories late at night on his computer in his office. I always found it funny how mad he would get when programs weren't working, or he couldn't figure something out. He always had some interest in midnight snack recipes as well. He was a cool dad all around. For example, when I was 7, in the summer of 1996, he took me to see Independence Day. Now, looking back, I was probably a little too young for all the destruction and alien violence, but there was always one set piece that interested me, which I looked forward to seeing each time the movie was on TV or playing on a well-worn VHS tape. With the title I've given to this story, you can probably see where I'm going with this. It was the Area 51 stuff in the film that stuck with me the most. I was fascinated by the movie creators' designs and ideas about what the secretive military base looked like. Actually, when I was young, I thought they had filmed those scenes inside the real place. Like they had gotten special access to some big underground extraterrestrial workshop right out of science fiction. I later rationalized that they just knew what the place looked like and recreated it. And it wasn't until I was 9 did I comprehend that they completely made it up. That realization both disappointed and fascinated me. I had to know what was really down there, how it ran, what experiments they might have been running, what kind of people worked there. And of course, whether or not they actually had aliens or their technology locked up in some secretive warehouse in the middle of a desert. By the time I was 10 and our house had internet access, I was gulping up the classic conspiracy theories about the base, going from one GeoCities or Angel Fire site to the next, and eating up every doctored image of alien autopsies and examinations of UFOs that I could find. Games like Half-Life and its Black Mesa Compound, or Perfect Dark's take on Area 51, or the arcade shooter itself all scratched and itched. But I knew when I was young just what I wanted to do with my special power. I would cheat the system. I would bypass all that security without anyone ever knowing, without ever having to join the military just to maybe get a shot at seeing the place. Could you blame me? I mean, if you could do what I can, wouldn't you try?
Of course.
I wasn't even that far away. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. Las Vegas was just a day trip, and the ranch, as it's sometimes called, wasn't far past that. Area 51, a legendary producer of American lore, was always just past the horizon while I came of age. And one day, I would see it. The problem was that I'd have to practice every night if I could. The range of my astral projection was my weakness, and I would have to self-train myself to extend it. It wasn't like I could just consult with a mentor or look up OBE tips and tricks on the internet. When I was in middle school, I learned how some Native American tribes sent their adolescents on vision quests. A spiritual journey involving fasting and praying that, allegedly, sometimes resulted in the sensation of body. Elsewhere in the world, various drugs supposedly trigger out-of-body experiences. Were an option for me, either to learn from or enhance my natural ability. I tried to avoid drugs entirely. They only inhibit my skill. Heck, even taking an Advil before bed makes the projection muddled and weak. The only way I could get better was by exercising strenuously. I took naps whenever I could, meditated often, and taught myself how to lucid dream every night. Anything to master my inner self. By the time I was 14, I was sometimes getting 12 hours of sleep a day. It's pretty excessive, even for a teenager. Over time, the boundary increased. The dark edges of the astral realm, which I could not breach, expanded outward. My neighborhood became my playground. I would go to bed early whenever my body allowed it, giving me time to float about and observe the secret lives of our neighbors before everyone else went to bed. You can call me a pervert. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. But I'm also not going to share what I've seen or name names. My curiosity and its rewards are for me alone. Suffice to say, though, humans are strange. When the veneer we all put on for the public fades away for the day, and we stop being a side character in others' lives, our true selves come out. Turns out, every family or couple has its problems. Those familiar arguments, little debates. We all have our peculiar hobbies and preferred subject matter that we look up online late at night when we think no one else is watching. But I'm not judging. If you lived in Flagstaff while I did, I apologize in advance for the fact that I may have spied on you for a bit at one point or another. Rest assured, though, your secrets are safe with me. I'm not going to say anything about anyone. I enjoy cheating the laws of the universe and observe without physically being there. But that's no excuse to start gossip. That said, though, I admit, I was no angel. I was a teenage guy for a few years of my life, and sometimes when I took a sick day in high school, I did have a few ghostly visits to the girls' locker rooms. Now, before you scold me, let me say that I was more fascinated by my astral range at that point than the things that I saw in the gym without others knowing. That wasn't the only exploring I did at my high school, though. I would go there night after night, up and down its dark halls. And when you think about it, how often did you get to be at your school at night? The few times you were, it was probably for some events where all the lights were on. There are few things more unnatural in this world than seeing your school in darkness. Shouts and bickering of its loud students, not even a lingering whisper in the air. I often heard things when I visited, but they weren't audible. Rather, they were auditory hallucinations. The trick of a mind, even projected, caused by empty liminal space. Don't forget, whatever I could actually hear would be muffled, so I could tell the difference. I never saw any ghosts or demons or extra-dimensional beings while in a projected state, and I did look. Every now and then, I could have sworn another person sensed my presence, or even looked right at me. And in these instances, I would always freeze up for a second. But it was just a coincidence each time, based on my position as I watched them. What attracted their attention was something on TV, or their cat making noise, the wind on their curtains. I've never been seen. I don't think it's even possible. I've even paid a visit to every psychic in town as they supposedly connected a customer with the deceased loved one, to no effect. They were either all frauds or just not very good at their profession. By the time I was out of state and in college, I had a firmer grasp on the reality of everything, including the banality of the place I had longed to one day break into. I had accepted by then that, in all likelihood, Area 51 was little more than a secretive military installation where prototype aircraft were housed and flown. Warehouses of spy planes and bombers, many of which were never mass-produced. Maybe it really did have its share of government secrets, but I no longer really believed that it had something more exotic, like aliens and their flying saucers. Life had disenchanted me to the point where I believed the Roswell incident really was just a weather balloon. Apologies to my childhood hero Fox Mulder, but I no longer really cared about believing. Then, my dad died in my sophomore year. Having focused on schoolwork and a smaller, more chaotic sleep schedule, I hadn't expanded my projection range all throughout college, and the students in my dorm were all so predictable that spying on them got boring. They played video games, got high, sometimes even did their schoolwork, and ignored calls from their parents. But once I came home for winter break to attend the funeral and spend some time with my mom, I got back into my nightly jaunts. It was sort of a way of grieving, through reliving my youth and remembering how much fun I could have as I simultaneously laid in bed and explored the town. And, truthfully, I was also hoping to somehow find my dad lingering about in that other realm. It was a sudden heart attack that took him out of life, and I figured that if anyone had unfinished business and a reason to cling on to the world of the living, it would be him. But he never showed up. You know, I regretted not telling him my secret back then, thinking that if he had known, maybe he would have tried to speak to me when I was floating around the house, halfway between the corporeal world and whatever is next for us, if there's anything at all. Looking back, there was no logic in my regrets. I was simply coping in my own way. I was, however, awakened to the idea of mortality and how limited our time could really be. And so, I made a promise to fulfill the wish of my younger self and see that secretive place out in the desert before I died and perhaps spent the rest of eternity drifting around the world. By that point, I wouldn't have a body to return to and no ability to tell all you what big secrets I might have uncovered. And certainly, if Area 51 did turn out to be a disappointment, there were so many other places I could check out that most humans would never see. I could visit the bunker under the White House, or get within inches of the radioactive molten slag that made up the elephant's foot under the Chernobyl power plant. I could swim around in an active volcano, see the inside of a famous dead person's coffin, count the money in a major bank's vault, peer into safety deposit boxes, and make bizarre finds throughout a self-storage building. Some of those things I had already done, actually. Not that there is much interest to see in the region. I spent a night in Las Vegas once, though, going around its casinos and seeing the security rooms and offices of the owners was one of my highlights by that point. I'm still trying to figure out some way to cheat at the games without getting my kneecaps broken in the process. After college, I spent a few more years refining my techniques and learning how to spend my meditative energy farther and farther outward. When I first discovered my power, I was restricted to my bedroom. My high school, I could go a few miles out. By college graduation, I was able to get 20 miles away from my body. But the farther out I got, the more mentally exhausted I would be when I returned to my physical self, and the less time I had to project. I can move about quickly when I explore, much faster than I can when I'm stuck inside muscle and bone. I've learned to catapult myself through the air to get around long distances. It's not quite as good as flying, but it isn't a bad accomplishment for an amateur without a teacher. Those big jumps are a necessity for extended projection. I can't wake up unless I return to my body. And that's the scariest aspect of what I can do. There have been times where I feel like I just barely made it back before a piece of myself faded away. And the thought of what might happen if I didn't return before running out of spiritual fuel, or whatever you want to call it, has always been the one thing that's kept me from taking bigger risks. Area 51? Well, that'd be my toughest challenge yet, just because of the distance that I'd have to cover. I had given some thought to the possibility that the secretive airbase might have some sort of detector able to spot me. It didn't seem likely, but in a world where there are pictures of pretty much everything, the fact that seemingly no one had ever leaked photos from deep inside the place made it enigmatic, like it was detached from the rest of reality. Once I put my mind back to it, I began to obsess about getting inside, just to see it. I had to see what was inside, if only to put a compulsive curiosity to rest. And then a meme made me move up my schedule. You see, in 2019, a group of a few hundred people showed up to raid Area 51 out of the thousands that originally planned to participate. Their proclaimed goal was to see them aliens, and that they couldn't all be denied the chance. But, of course, it turned out to be little more than a party near the base, with only a few arrests. It wasn't that I was worried about them getting inside and messing things up or causing the military staff to trigger some self-destruct safety measure. I just didn't want them to book up all the nearby rooms. By then, I had gotten my range up to about 30 miles, and I wasn't sure if I could do any better. as it simply felt like my upper limit. But if I stayed at Rachel, Nevada, which was around that far north of the base, I could make it work. I reserved a room in the small desert town's motel for an entire week, which was probably one of the longest stays they had ever seen. And to call it a town, well, that's a stretch. The place isn't more than a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. It has no restaurants outside of the motel, so most of my meals would come from the combination gas station general store. I wasn't expecting to be able to fully explore the base in a single night, but I didn't think it would be so huge that I wouldn't be able to cover it within my time frame. I went to bed as early as I could my first night at the alien-themed motel, barely able to contain my excitement about the up-and-coming spiritual break-in. Astral projection, for me at least, is best commenced in a lucid dream state. I can pull it off at limited distances and time while meditating, and I used to randomly experience it throughout the night, perceived it as a regular dream where I just explored my surroundings. But lucid dreaming was the way to do it right, where I could redirect all of my unused physical energy into my formless wandering self, all while I slept comfortably in a warm bed elsewhere. The first night was actually a disappointment. I got there fine, going south and flinging myself across a bald mountain where I looked down at the lights of the base itself. Crossing the exterior fence was pretty exciting. Traversing the enclosed desert around the buildings was thrilling. I kept expecting to be surrounded by helicopters and commandos any second, but there I was, strolling right into one of the most fortified places in the world. The problem was, I just couldn't figure out where to go to get into the sublevels. Everyone knew Area 51 has a basement, even without paying a visit, but they didn't make it easy to find a way down. I didn't want to spend too much time looking for nothing other than an elevator, just in case something happened and I lost my only chance to see anything at all of actual interest. So I regulated myself to exploring the aircraft hangars and the administrative offices. I had done a few trial runs on less secretive air bases, and on the surface, the homey airport wasn't all that different from the norm. I saw soldiers on patrol, staff making phone calls, people eating in a mess hall or working on computers, vending machines, furniture, bathrooms and locker rooms attached to exercise areas. Everything one would expect to see. It wasn't all that surprising. Area 51 isn't even blurred out on Google Maps. Anything truly meant to be kept away from prying eyes would be out of view of any passing satellite. The hangars I saw only held standard fighter or surveillance aircraft, including a few models from the past. I even saw one of the first American jet fighters in good condition, an F-86, the kind used way back in the Korean War. Couldn't tell you why they're keeping it airworthy. The only element I couldn't fully explore, other than the data on the local servers, were the contents of the file cabinets spread across several of the offices and officer quarters. I just have no way to see what's on papers that are pressed together inside a cabinet. So physical information wasn't only protected from possible hackers, it also keeps away the prying eyes of projectionists as well. I could have waited around for someone to open a file and read it as I peeked alongside them, but I kept my interest on covering ground instead. Now honestly, I'm not a big aircraft or military enthusiast. I'm sure there are a million people out there who would be fascinated with just exploring the surface freely like I did, but it wasn't enough to make all the effort and planning worth it. I would have to try again on a second night. But if I couldn't find a way down after 3 attempts, I figured I'd be ready to head home, disappointed. So, you may be thinking that I could just dip myself down into the ground and keep going until I emerge into an alien autopsy room or dark energy reactor. The thing is, dropping beneath solid ground isn't easy. It's slow and navigation is impossible, as I can no longer see anything. I have little sense of orientation or gravity when I project, so if I get disoriented, I could get turned around and end up burying towards the center of the earth, never returning to my body. It wasn't something I was about to try. I was restricted to elevators just like the locals who somehow managed to get assigned to the place. On my second run, I finished exploring the surface buildings and focused my attention on getting down into the abyss below. It occurred to me that such a secretive base had no reason to make the elevators easy to find. I scoured the insides of walls, looking for hidden rooms, but every building I revisited had no apparent means to gain access to the good stuff. A new idea didn't occur to me until I was halfway back to my body, as dawn's first light swept the sky. I'd have to wait another day to try it. The hangars. Area 51 was primarily used as a place to test out new aircraft in secrecy. That was what it was originally built to do, in a way that kept anything spying in the sky from catching a glimpse. There had to be at least one hangar, or maybe a few of them, that connected directly to the underground, to let them manufacture their prototypes down below and bring them up for their test flights. What I had seen so far must have been just the tip of a big iceberg. Thankfully, my third night of exploration proved the breakthrough I was waiting for. I went into one of the empty hangars, and despite no indication whether or not there was something beneath it, I lowered myself through the floor. After passing through about a meter of metal supports, I emerged into an enormous elevator shaft with dozens of lights built into its walls. The hangar was big enough on its own, but here was a whole pneumatic lift system that could raise or lower the entire floor of the structure designed to hold aircraft. It was my first clue that a megastructure lurked under the airport, and I went down about 50 feet till arriving at the bottom. A construction bay was just ahead, and some half-completed modern stealth aircraft occupied its space. Eventually, if they even planned on completing it, it would be wheeled onto the elevator and brought to the surface. But for now, the place was otherwise empty, with no tools or blueprints in sight. The flying wing-style aircraft was in a dull military gray color, and its cockpit was empty of any controls. I could have studied the thing all night, even if I wasn't all that interested in aircraft development. Instead, I moved on and began navigating the labyrinthian halls of a realm so few would ever get to see. Large concrete arches held up natural rock, excavated and drilled perhaps decades ago. Forklifts and inactive floodlights lingered in the halls, which were dimly lit up by orange sodium vapor lamps and fluorescent tubes. I didn't see anyone at all in this part of the base. By the end of the night, I had realized that the first sublevel was barely any more remarkable than the surface, other than being an impressive engineering feat. It seemed like an area with its glory days long behind it. It had dozens of vacant offices, sealed locker rooms, empty vending machines, and only a few uniformed base staff walked past me my whole visit. I looked through more hangars, along with storage rooms filled with old experimental aircraft that might have never seen the light of day, and now sat frozen in time under a tarp. I also found some sort of conference room that, for whatever reason, had been buried behind a concrete barrier. It still had its tables and chairs, which were right out of the 1960s, and positioned like people had fled the room in a hurry. For some reason, the room was still lit by a single dim wall light. The conference room turned out to be the most interesting thing I saw that night, just because of its mystery and the lack of any context. The first sub-level seemed to be seldom used. Maybe it sprang to life when a new contract for experimental aircraft arrived, and I had just shown up during the slow season. But I ended up spending the night wandering empty rooms and halls, mostly looking for a way farther down. It was a massive complex that I knew I didn't cover completely, and had no particular desire to continue exploring, because my gut told me it would be more of the same. Even so, I ended the night on another high note. You see, around dawn, I finally found a more active portion of the level that was lit more brightly and featured up-to-date rooms with modern computers and furniture. It was a small section overall, filled with a few dozen on-duty men and women. My lit reads told me that they're mostly just talking about current events. The discovery of the area led me to the central elevator that had eluded me, which required keycards. I slipped past the doors, floated up to the lift itself, and looked at the buttons to see that I had 3 more levels to check out. As the sun rose, I flew up the elevator to see where it had been hiding, and I emerged into a hardened concrete bunker-like building. I passed through a blast door and drifted along in a lengthy tunnel on the other side until I was under the sky again, and at a secondary checkpoint deeper inside the base. The entrance to the lower levels had been concealed with a mountainside, and the tunnel leading to it was buried at the end of a narrow valley, a good distance from the other surface buildings. It was both hard to see and well defended. Now I did my best to memorize the location and returned to my body once again, ready to spend another day doing almost nothing as I waited to sleep and travel once more. My next visit, I knew, was going to be a special one. I had stocked up on microwavable meals upon arriving in Rochelle, and rarely left my room, leaving the curtains drawn at all times. I knew I was messing around in a place I was never meant to see, that the government worked hard to keep a secret. So naturally, I had grown paranoid that feds or the military would somehow track me down and come banging on the door. And, well, I hadn't really felt that fear since I first started exploring as a kid, back when I thought the cops, of all people, would show up and arrest my young self for some sort of privacy invasion crimes. I never really rationalized how they might find me, though. But if anyone in the world could detect and find me, there was a good chance it might be the fine folks who have a career in Area 51. But I just couldn't work out how they would either, because there were too many unknowns about what they were capable of and what they researched. If they, for example, had at some point reverse-engineered alien technology, then who knows what manner of physics they were aware of that the rest of us may never understand. While projecting, I was sending some piece of myself out into the world, something tangible, if difficult to detect. I was receiving information and sending it back to my brain for processing. It just happened to never have found anyone that could tell me how I did, what I did, and what kind of signals I might have been broadcasting that someone or something else could perceive. It's that fear of being caught. It always dogged me. It wasn't so much the consequences that scared me, as it was finding out that there existed a way to find or catch me in such a vulnerable state. This time, that worry was also manifesting itself in a perhaps rather crazy concern that Area 51 had a honeypot set up in part of its base that would attract people like me, and capture our projected selves for imprisonment and experimentation. Hell, I started thinking that I would stumble upon a room of other trapped souls who got too curious. It felt like the perfect twist ending to my story. I could never see myself as the first one to truly have access to astral projection. I always assumed someone had done it before, and there were hundreds of people like me, if not more. And if that were true, then surely someone had paid a visit to a mysterious installation in an American desert. And if that were true, said installation,
oh my god,
might have already created countermeasures. Or I could just be overthinking and over-worrying again. That was the constant consequence of living a lonely life. I have stress feedback loops in my head that sometimes led to panic attacks. But that's never been a problem while projecting. I guess that's one reason it usually makes me feel so peaceful. By the fourth night, all of my good food was gone and the motel TV was no longer providing any entertainment. Exploring the base was all I had to look forward to, and I wanted to make the most of it. As soon as I could, I jumped straight to the main elevator and floated my way down to the second sublevel. This was where the trains ran. Area 51 had long been rumored to have an underground rail system, though there were debates if it was just for local use or if it connected to more distant bases, or hidden entrances or cargo depots. The level was almost entirely pure cave, drilled away some time ago by large machines. Flatbeds ran on electric rail, transporting material and aircraft parts across the installation. There were a few rooms to speak of, and the cars moved without human operators till they reached their terminus, where they were unloaded and moved by people who looked like they might have spent weeks at a time without seeing sunlight. I couldn't be certain if it was always this busy on this level, or if there was some big project in the works that required constant transport of goods, but it was definitely active down there, with cars coming and going constantly. The tunnels were maze-like and sprawling, and with little signage, it was easy to get lost. I must have spent around 2 hours just trying to find something more interesting than the extensive rail line itself. And after I unintentionally doubled back to the elevator, I chose to take it down again, instead of spending further time attempting to navigate the local subway system. The third sublevel was much smaller than the first, and it looked entirely different. Its corridors were narrow, confining, and featured more metal than concrete or natural rock. It was reminiscent of the interior of a nuclear submarine, and most of the few people I saw walking around, they wore suits and ties. And those that did not, well, they were armed guards, which was strange. What were they protecting, or trying to keep inside this far down? Aliens, I hoped. Seeing a live colony of little gray guys would have made this trip a lot more worth it, and I couldn't wait to describe them to the world, whether or not anyone believes any part of my story. But there was something weird and concerning about the floor. For one, I could no longer pass through the walls. I could push my way through some of the metal siding, but something inside the wall stopped me. Nor could I get through the bulkhead-style doors if they were closed, which severely limited my ability to explore the floor. I was able to get a peek inside the room when someone went into or left them occasionally, but they always got closed again, like it was protocol. If I had gone into any room, I would probably end up trapped inside it. It was a risk that I couldn't take. What little I did see of the offices and labs on this floor didn't suggest that aliens had ever been kept there. Not that I had high expectations. The fact that I couldn't go through the walls or the floor and ceiling for that matter was something new to me. There must have been some sort of energy field inside them. Maybe they were there blocking something else, some kind of signal. By extension, they limited my mobility in the process. Seeing the sub-level as a dangerous place to linger, I returned to the elevator and dropped downward to the fourth and presumably lowest level. Only, I descended into darkness and something solid. I was already on the bottom floor, at least that the elevator serviced. Either they filled the space below with concrete to seal it off, or there was never another sub-level, and the button in the lift was just a dummy for whatever reason. I went back looking through the third level's hallways to see if I had missed anything. The old hanging wall clocks inside showed me that it was 3 in the morning, so I had a few more hours before my body would start trying to wake up and ask where its owner was. I had the idea that the floor below, if it existed, might still be accessible somewhere else. Passing hallway after hallway and going down each side of the intersection, I got a closer look at the weapons in the hands of each patrolling guard whenever I got a chance. It didn't seem like any sort of gun I was familiar with. They actually looked non-lethal, and their barrels were equipped with panels of lights that surrounded some sort of beam emitter. They had the appearance of a sci-fi laser rifle, but logic told me they were likely a deterrent weapon, which may have fired off bright bursts of light in a powerful laser, or burning microwave energy. It made no sense. If someone managed to get all the way down here after dodging all the real bullets up above, why give the guards at the heart of the base rifles like this? Unless, as I speculated already, they were keeping something inside, and these were the only weapons that could contain it. Eventually, I noticed something lining the segments where the hallways were connected by seams and rivets. Every few meters were thin strips of metal and LED lights that ran along the wall, floor, and ceiling. I didn't think much of them at first, thinking that they were just part of a peculiar emergency light system. At least, until I randomly set one of them off. The moment I did so was one of the scariest moments of my life so far. I can't really explain why I only triggered one of the apparent sensors long after I began traversing the level. At the time, all I could think about was, how could anything in the world be able to pick up my presence? The LEDs lit up in a pulsing red to attract attention, and my dampened hearing just barely picked up an alarm. This was so bizarre and new to me that I froze up. I just floated there, feeling exposed and helpless. Guards rushed in like they were trained to do, despite how rarely, if ever, this sort of thing happened. They couldn't see me, but they swept their weapons about like they were searching, and some of the men had what appeared to be scanners on their wrists. They were trying to find something invisible, like a ghost. I would say that it was absurd, but I'm someone who could send my own spirit out into the world. The existence of ghosts was never a big leap for me. The younger guys soon looked a little less nervous about what they were doing, and one of the older ones deactivated the alarm as the whole group continued searching. I was still too freaked out to focus much on their lip movements, but it was obvious that this was a major event for them. They looked at the other hall sensors to see if the other ones were going off, and one of the men swept his scanner right over my position. Reflexively, I held my non-existent breath as he did so, but he didn't seem to pick up anything. I kept very still and watched the entirety of the procedures they followed. The situation was called in over the radio. The men finished their scans and began to disperse. except for the one guy who waited for a technician to show up, who then checked the sensor for a malfunction. The tech even plugged a wire into a port near the sensor and ran some software checks on a tiny portable computer. I only started moving again once the IT guy finished up and left. All total, the delay and the abundance of my caution had cost me an hour, and I would have to return to my body soon. But first, I convinced myself to press on ahead, even after what seemed to be my detection. Now wary of the sensors every time I passed one, I stayed calm as to keep my astral energy output low, and I continued down a particularly long hallway that ended at a promising large chamber. It was the most secured place I had seen yet. A circular room with only 2 exits, and covered by multiple security cameras and automated weaponry. The turrets in the same non-lethal design as the things the guards were armed with. And ahead of me was a large segmented blast door painted orange and black, with faded numbers, 01, painted on its stainless steel surface. Like the rest of the floor, I couldn't pass through the barrier, and I had already really wanted to find out what was on the other side. It probably held whatever the guards were keeping down here and were worried about, sure, but it didn't matter. I wanted in. For my journey all the way out here and its risks to be worth it, I needed in. I waited for as long as I could on the off chance someone would open it, but I had to return to the surface once I felt the connection to my body beginning to wane. I returned to it just as it was waking up, a lust in my gut to see just what the base's biggest mystery might have been. Getting past that door was already my new obsession. It was like the Area 51 of Area 51. My childhood dream reignited. I would never get answers from anyone in the world, and the odds of finding out what was inside by peeking at any visible papers or computer screens throughout the base, well, seemed non-existent. I had seen a lifetime share of incredibly exclusive places. And of course, because of human nature, I still had to see that final secret. That 5th day, it was agonizing. Not just because of the wait to get back under the base, but it was also when Area 51 raiders started showing up. There might have only been a few hundred that actually went through with coming out to the desert to party, get drunk, and live out their alien rescue fantasies. But the motel, my sanctuary, filled up with rowdy out-of-towners while camper van and motorcycle engines ruined the quiet atmosphere. All day I thought about that door and what was behind it. Maybe a new super advanced aircraft, a deconstructed alien starship, the skeletal remains of an ancient god. I would have accepted an empty warehouse as long as I found out for certain and didn't go through the rest of my life not knowing. I had no idea what was driving my urges, only that I wanted to see something truly special before heading home. Well, so far, I felt that I hadn't. After hours of television and internet browsing just to pass the time, all while staying inside my room to avoid social contact, I grew unreasonably excited just to see the sunset light hit my room's window. By 8 p.m., I was already in bed trying to force myself to sleep, since I couldn't take a sleeping aid, and my new neighbors were rude and noisy. It was torturous. I wouldn't wake up before my sleeping cycle was complete once I was out of my body. But getting there, it was no easy task, and it took 2 hours of restless tossing and turning. And after all that, the night was a bust. See, I explored very little else of the base, instead spending most of my time in that final chamber with the giant door, just waiting for someone to come along and open it. I understood that in all likelihood, no one would have a need to while I was at the base. I just didn't want to go home thinking I missed another potential chance because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. In hindsight, I wish I'd seen more of the base while I had the chance, instead of wasting all my time in one place hoping for the impossible. And so I returned to my body disappointed, then suffered through a 6th day, my time at the motel running out. I could extend my stay, but I felt that it would just lead to more extensions to feed an obsession, and I had to get out of that nowhere town. My mom called me, as did my employer, both of them wondering when I'd come back. Responsibilities at home were putting pressure on me to finish my time in Nevada, and my room's air conditioner was now just barely working. The repair guy wouldn't be coming anytime soon. I was miserable, but I had to stay just a little longer. I almost spent the night dreaming instead, just to escape from reality for a while. I never projected for 6 nights in a row, so I only ever saw the reprieve of darkness during the few naps I had over the week. And then, no one showed up to open that damn door for me again. See, every time I was about to leave that security room to explore more of the base, I convinced myself that someone was on their way to let me through. But it never happened. 10 hours I spent lingering on that sub-level I could only barely navigate. Hell, I even tried sending psychic waves to the people down there in an effort to manipulate them into unlocking that door. Didn't work. So I woke up early in the morning, sweating and, well, feeling really pissed off. I knocked on my walls and yelled at the people next door to turn down their music. After they told me to shut up, I left my room. I packed up some water and food and I drove off. I might have been able to tolerate the desert and the heat for one more day, but not the motel room where I felt like I was losing my mind. I actually ended up driving down to Las Vegas and spending the day on the Strip, blowing money on tourist shows. It worked so far as it let me get my mind off of things, calm down a bit, and just detox from the shut-in routine I had reduced myself to. Getting some actual meals at real restaurants helped as well, but still, I never wanted to come back to Nevada again. I arrived back at Rachel around sunset feeling refreshed, and instead of heading to my room, I went to the party. Or rather, I just observed it from afar. The drunken, eccentric types looked like they were having more fun than I had over the past week. They were gathered up at the gate just hanging out as base guards made sure they stayed back and didn't try to run inside. The raiders were smart enough to not get shot. Although, as I said earlier, I did see a few of them get arrested. Their fun lasted into the night, even if they sadly never got a chance to see any aliens. But if that didn't disappoint them, I figured I shouldn't have let myself feel disappointed either. I had actually seen the inside of the base, unlike any of those guys. I had fulfilled the childhood dream. I could head home right then, look back at all this in a year, and still feel excited about everything I had witnessed inside Area 51. But that would never be good enough for me, and so instead, I drove my car to a secluded area near the base, reclined the seat, covered all the windows, and I fell asleep.
Tonight, you landed enough Wyndham Rewards points to land in that oh-so-alluring place. Your screensaver.
See you soon, Henry.
Chillin'. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you triumph.
If I projected this close to the place, everything would be in sharper focus, giving me a better experience. And I would cut back on the travel time to and from my body. I was determined to leave the state on a high note, Once I was adrift, I floated over the party by the main gate and went right by the revelers, and then past the guards that stopped them from going any further. If only they could see me and cheer as they watched just another regular dude making his way inside the base. I've made fun of them, but I would slowly start to see the guys as a good luck charm as the night progressed. Before I even arrived at the elevator, I saw something new and worth following. 2 people in full hazmat suits with tinted visors that hid their faces came walking out of one of the side rooms within the mountain tunnel. They were pushing a cart with a large metal crate on top. Even if they had nothing to do with that final door, I wanted to find out what they were up to. So, I tagged along without them knowing. They went through all the checkpoints. It didn't stop to chat with anyone as others moved aside for them in the hallways. I steadily realized that they were heading down to the same route I took to get to the locked door. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but it was looking more and more like the 2 were my ticket inside. By the time the 3 of us were heading across the lower sub-level together, I tried my hardest to contain my excitement, which was the only thing I could think of to avoid setting off alarms again. But the hazmat boys nearly broke my heart the moment they made a right at the last junction before the door. But it turned out that they were only having their keycards programmed in a surveillance room. It was filled with camera feeds on a TV array and had a single guard watching them all, including the 4 cameras pointed at the big door. It must have had codes that changed daily as an extra layer of security. Once their keys were updated, we arrived at the last obstacle. They ran their cards into 2 separate scanners, pressed down on 2 red buttons with their thumbs, and then finally pulled the 2 levers within the door itself. Maybe this was something they did on a weekly basis, or it could have been an annual thing, and I'd just gotten extremely lucky. Whatever the case, the huge slabs of metal at long last began to slide open, to reveal the darkness beyond. Lights flickered to life past into a pair of mounts on the lift, which didn't start moving until the big door was closed again. And I was right there with them. I was now committed, having no way out until they left first. The elevator went downward at a tepid pace, and I stayed with my 2 best friends instead of going on ahead of them. I had come this far, so I was willing to be patient a little longer. I was heading down into the inner sanctum of Area 51, a forbidden place very few would ever think about, much less see for themselves. The ride lasted 10 minutes or more, and it felt like we descended deep into the earth. If ever there was a portal to hell or another dimension, it would be here. After the lift came to a stop, a second giant door opened as slowly as the first, revealing something perplexing, but not quite bizarre just yet. Ahead of me was a purely stone antechamber carved into bedrock. The surfaces were immaculately smooth, about 30 feet of rock illuminated only by the elevator corridor's light, led up to a large, perfectly proportioned open square that preceded a void of darkness. The square was roughly 40 feet long on each side, so it was certainly a sizable doorway to whatever lay beyond. Now, it wasn't completely without technology or machinery. The opening was lined with the same sensor strips used on the 3rd floor, and there were large circular hatches built into the stone on either side of the door. I stepped out into the antechamber with the hazmat crew as they wheeled out their cargo and looked to my sides. On the left was an old regular-sized metal door that showed signs of disrepair. While my buddies worked to unlock their crate and remove its contents, I went over to get a better look at the old side door.
Let's come back. You've already pushed on an entire hour, so like, comment, and subscribe.